He opened the hospital door ready to kill, but froze when he saw his ex-wife cradling newborn twins. Twins with his eyes. Now, Chicago's most feared mafia boss must face the woman he betrayed, the sons he never knew, and a revenge that runs in his own blood. Stay till the end, because in this story, love isn't forgiveness. It's war. Rain clawed at the skyscraper windows like angry ghosts trying to get in. From the top floor of Night Tower, Chicago's skyline burned in neon and lightning. Inside, Adrian Knight watched the city he owned with the stillness of a predator. His reflection stared back at him through the glass. Ice blue eyes, tailored suit, expression carved from control. The world knew him as a storm in human form, ruthless, untouchable, and feared by everyone who dared whisper his name. Power suited him. Loneliness didn't. He sat behind a black glass desk, littered with reports that could start or end wars. Drug shipments, bribes, blood deals inked under candlelight. To anyone else, it would have looked like victory. To him, it felt like a cage. He'd built an empire of obedience and silence, and it had cost him every trace of warmth he'd once had. His father had beaten mercy out of him before he learned what love was. He ruled with precision, not passion. He trusted no one and loved nothing. That was how he survived, until the night she walked in. A soft knock broke through the storm's rhythm. "Come in," he said, voice low and sharp enough to cut. The door opened, and everything in the room changed. Elena Grace entered like a quiet secret. No tremble, no perfume, no hesitation. Just grace and focus wrapped in a simple black suit. She carried a folder to his desk, her heels clicking once, twice, like a heartbeat in perfect control. When she spoke, her voice didn't waver. "Mr. Knight," she greeted, looking him straight in the eye. That alone made her dangerous. People usually avoided his gaze after 1 second. Elena didn't blink. Her eyes, gray with flecks of something unreadable, met his with calm detachment. No fear, no worship, no agenda he could read. "Leave it on the desk," he ordered. She obeyed, sliding the folder into place with precise hands. There was nothing submissive about her movement. She worked like someone who understood boundaries and didn't fear crossing them if needed. He leaned back, exhaling smoke that coiled around the distance between them. "First week and you're still standing," he said. "That's rare here." "I learn fast," she replied. "Confidence, not arrogance." That intrigued him more than he wanted to admit. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the rain-streaked window behind her. He couldn't stop his eyes from following it. Something about the way she held herself, like calm before disaster, reminded him of things he'd buried. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, almost testing her. "Everyone does," she said softly. "But I prefer to know what you need." His cigarette paused halfway to his lips. Nobody ever spoke to him like that. Not his men, not his rivals, not even his lovers. He almost smiled but stopped himself in time. Then finished the Sorrento files before midnight. "They're already done." He lifted a brow. "Already? I assumed you'd want efficiency." Adrian studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Efficient, sharp, unexpected. "Why take a job that could get you killed?" he asked as she turned to leave. "I needed a challenge," she said, voice steady. When she left, the scent of rain and coffee lingered. He caught himself staring at the closed door far longer than he should have. That night he couldn't focus. Every page he opened blurred with her handwriting, neat, elegant, calm. He poured himself whiskey, but even the burn didn't silence the echo of her voice. At 2 a.m., he was still reading her reports. Flawless work. No mistakes. But what gnawed at him wasn't the perfection. It was her restraint. No note, no personal mark, nothing he could use to read her. When thunder cracked outside, he rose, restless. The storm outside felt too much like the one inside him. He walked to the window, watching the city pulse in rainlight. Below, Chicago thrummed with life, sirens, traffic, sins. And he wondered for the first time in years if someone like Elena Grace could even exist in his world without being broken by it. The door opened again, Marco, his right hand, stepped in. "The Sorrento buyer handled," he said. "Handled permanently?" Marco nodded, then hesitated. Miss Grace saw the transfer. She knows it wasn't clean. Adrian's pulse slowed. And she didn't say a word. Just looked at me like she already knew. He waved him off, but the thought stayed. Not naive, not afraid. She'd seen the blood behind his empire and hadn't flinched. Interesting had become dangerous. He sat back down and flicked open his father's lighter. The tiny flame danced before his eyes. "Never let anyone see your weakness," the old man's voice whispered through memory. Adrian snapped it shut with a metallic click that sounded too much like regret. Later, he checked the security feed. Elena appeared on one of the screens, leaving the building under her umbrella, her expression unreadable. But as the lightning flashed, he saw her lips move. He zoomed in. 2 words. "Not again." The words stuck like glass in his mind. Not again. Did she know him from before? Impossible. He'd remember those eyes. He always remembered eyes. Morning came slow and gray. In the boardroom, his lieutenant sat silent, waiting for orders. He gave them calm and mechanical, but his attention fractured when the elevator chimed. Elena walked in, sunlight catching her hair like a dare. "You're early," he said. "I don't sleep much," she replied. A few of his men shifted uncomfortably. Nobody spoke to Adrian Knight that way. He dismissed them all with a single look, and silence fell as the door closed behind them. "Do you believe in loyalty?" he asked when they were alone. "Do you?" she countered. The smallest hint of a smirk touched his mouth. "In my world, loyalty ends in graves." "Then maybe you're looking in the wrong world." Her words landed like a blade. He stepped closer, testing her calm. "Careful," he murmured. "You sound like you want to fix me." "I don't fix people," she said evenly. "I remind them they're still alive." Something inside him shifted again. Small, dangerous, unfamiliar. The phone rang before he could answer. He took the call, listened, and his face hardened. Trouble. Always trouble. He ended the call and turned toward the door. "Cancel my meetings." "You'll need backup," she said. He paused. "You offering?" "I'm reminding you," she said, "that empires fall when kings walk alone." For a moment he said nothing. Then he left. Hours passed. Gunfire, missing trucks, broken deals. He handled it all with mechanical precision, but her voice followed him through every order. When he finally returned to his office, the night was quiet again, and she was there, waiting. "You're bleeding," she said. "Not my blood?" "Still blood." He stared at her, exhausted but unwilling to admit it. "Why are you still here?" "You hired me to manage your chaos." "I can't do that from home." He looked at her for a long moment. For the first time in years, he didn't see an employee. He saw a mirror, a woman who didn't fear his darkness because she carried her own. "You don't have to keep proving you're unbreakable," she said quietly. He froze. That voice, that certainty, that knowing. "How would you know?" he asked. "Because broken people recognize their own." Silence fell like snowfall, soft, cold, and final. He turned toward her slowly, his usual sharpness gone. For a moment the king looked human. Then the phone buzzed again. A message. Unknown number. He opened it. A photo appeared. Elena leaving the building. Behind her a figure followed. A shadow in the rain. No face. Just a silhouette with an umbrella. Beneath it, a message. "You can't protect what you don't understand." His jaw tightened. "Marco," he said into the intercom. "Track a car." "Already did, boss." But the signal's gone. Vanished 2 blocks from here. Adrian's blood turned to ice. He stared at the photo again. That shadow, it wasn't random. It was deliberate, watching, waiting. Another message came through. "You're not the only knight she'll destroy." He froze. Nobody knew that name. Not his real one. Not the truth buried under the empire he'd built. Whoever sent that message knew more than they should. He reached into his drawer, pulling out a gun. The metal felt familiar, cold comfort in his palm. He slipped it into his coat, every instinct screaming that the storm outside wasn't weather anymore. He stepped out of his office, the city's heartbeat echoing in his veins. The elevator opened to the lobby, where rain hammered the marble like gunfire. Lightning split the sky as he stepped outside. Across the street, a figure stood beneath an umbrella, motionless, watching him. Black coat. Stillness, like death. The same silhouette from the photo. Adrian's hand moved toward his gun. Lightning flashed. Again, brighter this time, and the street was empty. Shadow was gone. The only thing left was the sound of rain and the echo of his own heartbeat. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Knight, the man who feared nothing, realized something terrifying. The storm hadn't come for his empire. It had come for him. The storm outside had calmed, but inside Knight Tower, a different fire had begun to burn. It wasn't made of anger or ambition. It was something far more dangerous. Something Adrian Knight couldn't control. Elena Grace had become the one variable he couldn't calculate. She wasn't afraid of him, and that made her both fascinating and infuriating. In his world, people trembled when he entered a room. She simply looked up, acknowledged him, and went back to her work as if he were just another man. But he wasn't just another man. He was Chicago's ghost king, untouchable, cold, merciless. Yet somehow when she spoke, he listened. When she frowned, he paused. When she smiled, something in his chest ached in a way bullets never could. Weeks passed like that. Unspoken tension simmering under the surface of business meetings and midnight phone calls. She was the one who stayed late without being asked, who kept the empire running while the city slept. He told himself it was her competence that drew him in. But deep down, he knew better. It wasn't her work. It was her presence. She filled silence like light filled a dark room, quietly, without apology. One evening, she stood across his office, going over a financial report, her hair pulled back loosely, a strand falling against her cheek. He watched her talk, not hearing a single word. Her voice faded behind the steady drum of his heartbeat. "Mr. Knight," she said, snapping him back. "You're not listening." He blinked, caught off guard, something that hadn't happened in years. "I'm considering your proposal." "You're staring," she corrected softly. He didn't deny it. "Maybe I am." A flicker of something unreadable passed across her face. "That's not in my job description." "Neither was challenging me," he murmured. She gave a faint smile, controlled but daring. "Someone has to." That night the city lights stretched endlessly below them, and Adrian found himself wondering how someone so calm could make him feel so restless. He was used to taking what he wanted, to control, to silence. But with her, control felt pointless. Every time he tried to keep his distance, she closed the gap with nothing but her words. When he snapped orders, she didn't crumble. When he pushed her away, she stood taller. And when he fell silent, she waited, not for permission, but for truce. That patience unnerved him more than any enemy ever had. At first he fought it. He buried himself in deals, in violence, in the familiar rhythm of fear and power. But her presence always found him again. She'd leave coffee on his desk when he forgot to eat. She'd fix the small details others missed. She'd tell him the truth no one else dared to. He began to need that honesty like air. It terrified him. One night, he found her in the archive room alone, the glow of the desk lamp tracing gold against her skin. She looked up as he entered. "You shouldn't be here this late," he said. "Neither should you," she replied. He leaned against the doorway, watching her sort files. "You work like someone running from something." "Maybe I am," she said without looking up. "Maybe we both are." Her words hit too close. He stepped closer, shadows folding around them. "You don't know me." "Then let me," she said. For a moment he couldn't breathe. No one had ever asked that before. Not to know him. Not the name, not the power. Him. "Knowing me gets people hurt," he warned. "I don't scare easy." He took another step, the distance between them shrinking. "You should." "Maybe I should," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "But I don't." Something snapped in him then. Not with anger, but with recognition. She wasn't like anyone else. She didn't want his empire. She didn't want his money. She wanted the man buried under the ruins, and for the first time, he wanted to be that man again. Days turned into nights that bled together. She became his confidant, his anchor in a world built on lies. He never touched her, not yet, but every look, every word carried a promise neither dared to speak aloud. Rumors spread in the tower. Men whispered about the boss's new obsession. Some thought she was a spy. Others thought she was a fool. Adrian silenced them all with a single glance. But even silence couldn't hide the truth. The King of Chicago had fallen. Not to bullets or betrayal, but to a woman who didn't bow. Their connection deepened in the quiet moments. A shared drink after midnight, a glance across the boardroom, a fleeting touch when she handed him a file. One evening, the power flickered in the tower. The storm had returned, tearing across the skyline. She was the only one still in the building. He found her standing by the window watching the lightning. "You're not afraid of storms?" he asked. "No," she said. "They remind me everything powerful eventually passes." He stood beside her, their reflections merging in the glass. "Not everything," he whispered. "Maybe not," she said, turning to him. "But even storms die, Mr. Knight." He reached out then slowly, his hand brushing her wrist. She didn't move away. The air between them cracked louder than thunder. He could smell the rain in her hair, the electricity of something neither could control. "Elena," he breathed. "Adrian," she answered, breaking protocol for the first time. Her name on his lips felt like surrender. His name on hers felt like salvation. He leaned in, the world narrowing to the space between their breaths. For once, he wasn't the Mafia boss. He wasn't his father's son. He wasn't a weapon. He was just a man standing before the only thing that had ever made him hesitate. His hand cupped her jaw, thumb grazing her pulse. Her eyes fluttered shut, then his phone buzzed. He ignored it. The vibration persisted. She opened her eyes, whispering, "You should answer." "I don't care," he said. But when he glanced at the screen, everything inside him froze. "Father." The name glowed like a warning from another life. The last time that number appeared, someone had died. Elena noticed the shift in his face. "Who is it?" He didn't answer. His jaw locked. The air changed. Whatever tenderness had been there vanished behind the armor he'd worn his whole life. The phone rang again. Finally, he answered. "What do you want?" His voice was flat, cold, stripped of humanity. A pause. Then an old, familiar chuckle, deep, cruel, and calculated. "You sound surprised to hear your own blood," his father said. Adrian's grip tightened on the phone. "You stopped being blood a long time ago. Careful, son. That tongue of yours cost me more men than I care to count. I'm not your soldier anymore." "You're whatever I decide you are," the voice hissed. "And I've decided it's time you learned what family truly means." Adrian's pulse hammered. "If this is about business, This isn't business," his father interrupted. "This is legacy." A chill crawled down his spine. "What legacy?" The line went silent. Then the old man spoke a single word, one that sliced through the room like a knife. "Marriage." Adrian froze. "What?" "You'll marry who I tell you to," his father said calmly. "For the family. For power. For peace." Elena stood silently watching him, sensing danger without knowing why. "I don't make deals anymore," Adrian said through gritted teeth. "You will if you care about survival," his father replied. "And about that pretty assistant of yours." Adrian's blood ran cold. "Don't!" "Ah," the man chuckled darkly. "So the rumors are true. The king has a weakness. That makes things easier." The line went dead. Adrian stared at the screen, the sound of static buzzing in his ear long after the call ended. Elena stepped closer. "Adrian, what happened?" He looked at her, really looked, as thunder rolled outside, reflecting in his eyes like burning glass. For the first time, she saw fear behind the ice. He turned away, fists clenched, the storm returning full force beyond the window. "Elena," he whispered almost to himself. "You shouldn't have stayed." "Why?" she asked softly, because in that moment, he realized something that shattered every wall he'd built. She wasn't his mistake. She was his weakness, and his father had just found her. The phone buzzed again. A message this time. A photo appeared. Elena, smiling in his office, taken from somewhere above, and below it, one line that made his breath stop. Enjoy your last night before the engagement announcement. Adrian moved through the days after that first storm, with a steadiness he hadn't felt in years, but steadiness does not equal peace. The private moments he carved with Elena tasted like oxygen, short, sharp, stolen between boardroom tempests and nights that smelled of blood and money. They never spoke about the world outside the glass walls. They spoke in fragments, in things left unsaid that fit between them like a pact. She was careful with laughter, precise with words, and when she touched his hand, it was not the clumsy need of a worshipper, but the deliberate contact of someone who understood what being tethered meant. He began to schedule his life around those pockets of negligible grace and the architecture of his empire, previously all angles and lines, softened at the corners. Their marriage was not a spectacle. No guests, no vows shouted in a hall. It was a decision made in the kind of silence the powerful mistake for certainty. A judge's signature on a Tuesday, a whispered promise in a room lit only by street light. They wanted anonymity, not because secrecy was romantic, but because secrecy kept leverage away. Adrian asked for nothing theatrical. Elena wanted nothing that could be used against her or the boys who did not yet exist. The ring was a simple thing, a smooth circle that fit like inevitability. Neither of them told anyone. The city kept humming around them, unaware that two of its most dangerous players had traded the expected script for something fragile and private. They lived like that for 5 months, rarely in the limelight, fiercely private, inhabiting a kind of suspended, dangerous intimacy. Elena moved through his world without being consumed by it. She learned the cadence of his men, the dangerous humor of his lieutenants, and how to read a room in a building where every smile could be a knife. She claimed a tiny territory within his life, a chair near his desk, a shelf with books he didn't read, a coffee cup he pretended not to notice. Those small intrusions recalibrated him. He noticed the order in which she loaded the dishwasher and the way she smoothed the bed before leaving for work. Gestures that made his palace-like existence resemble something more like a home. This was not softness that made him small. It was a quiet strength that fit into him like a missing piece. Despite the quiet, nothing in Adrian's orbit stayed untouched by the old world. Rivals tested borders. Satellites of his father's influence pulled at the seams. Anyone with eyes could see the danger in allowing softness to grow within empire walls. He tried sometimes to keep those worlds separated, his decisions cold and strategic, his private life stubbornly humane. But compartments in his life splintered easily. A misfiled invoice, a conversation overheard in a hallway, a courier's curious glance. Small things that together build a ladder for enemies. Elena understood this more keenly than most. She did not romanticize his name or his violence. She catalogued the risks and worked to minimize them. That was her way of loving him, pragmatic, defensive, and far from sentimental. There were nights when the two of them sat in the dark, a bottle between them, speaking in fragments of things they were not ready to admit. He told her about the way the city looks at dawn, how the river cuts light into the streets and makes saints of the guilty. She told him about the small betrayals she'd survived before she walked onto his floor. High school debts, a crooked landlord, a mentor who sold her trust for a promotion. Those admissions were not confessions, but carefully placed stones that built a path towards something resembling trust. They learned the contours of each other's fear. The thing that scared Adrian most was not loss of power. It was the knowledge that someone could hold his interior landscape and walk away with it. The intimacy between them grew in the narrow hours. Often it happened without fanfare, his coat draped across a chair, her hand on the small of his back as they leaned over documents, a shared plate of food when he forgot to eat. He began to protect her the way a man protects memory, not because he believed he was noble, but because she had become an axis without which his world tilted. Yet there was an undercurrent neither acknowledged, the precarious arithmetic of his life. Every concession he made privately had potential cost publicly. Power exacts bargains, and bargains have teeth. The very fact he'd chosen this secrecy told him he was gambling with more than his heart. And then there were moments of near violence disguised as tenderness. Once, after a long quarrel about trust, an argument where both said things that should have carved them in half, Elena packed her coat. He watched her collect herself with a predator's patience, then caught her hand with a force that stopped her at the door. He pulled her closer, not in anger but in the sharp, terrifying need to make sure what was real. Her face tilted up to his. She did not flinch at the grip on her wrist. Instead, she spoke his name like a litany that steadied him. They kissed then, neither clumsy nor desperate but awful in its intensity, because it revealed how much was at stake. In that kiss, choices hardened into vowless promises. They held each other like people who'd found refuge in a burning building. The days that followed were a careful choreography. He became clandestine in ways that felt foreign, canceling meetings, inventing plausible excuses, moving through the city like a man with something he could not show. Elena adjusted, transforming from assistant to partner in an equal and dangerous sense. She learned his body language, the blink that meant a lie, the way he shifted when danger pressed close. She became the only person who could read him without the cost of fear, and that made her presence an irresistible weakness and a strategic advantage. Adrian guarded her with the cold logic of a commander and the irrational fervor of a man who had not known he could want anything else. The quiet softened into ordinary habit until the week the letter arrived. It was a morning that held no heraldry. The city was wet silver from a brief rain, and the light had that merciless clarity that shows every imperfection. A courier, a nondescript young man with a face like he'd been told not to look at men such as Adrian, handed over the envelope. It bore the family crest pressed into wax, the mark his lineage used to announce both mercy and judgment. Adrian recognized the seal before he smelled the paper. He recognized the curve of the script as something trained to command obedience. He moved through the room with the slowness of someone walking into a trap and set the envelope down like an unexploded wound between them. Elena was at the sink, rinsing a glass. When she turned and saw the seal, the muscles along her jaw tightened just enough to betray interest. "Family?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched his for a weather that hadn't yet arrived. He slid the paper across the desk to her with a hand that did not tremble. She didn't open it at once. That small act, choosing when to reveal what had been delivered, felt intimate, like deciding together whether to lift a stone and look at what lies underneath. He watched her read, as if watching a tide not yet turned. Her face rearranged itself, curiosity into caution, into a quiet anger that burned slow and low. Words on paper can be sharp. Words on paper with his family's seal can be lethal. She folded the letter back to him without comment, and he felt the air constrict her like a held breath. He could have read it himself. He could have torn the thing open and absorbed the threat like breath. But he let her keep the first look. There was a moment, a fulcrum, when both their futures trembled. The message inside changed the color of the room. It was not long. It did not have to be. The economy of threats is efficiency. The family did not decorate its cruelty. He read it once, then again, and it felt as if some unseen force had rolled up the city and pressed it into his chest. The paper carried instruction and menace in equal measures, a single sentence that balanced on the point of an ultimatum. He felt the corner of his mouth go numb, the kind of numbness that precedes action. Elena's eyes found him after he'd read it, steady, luminous, not seeking mercy. "What does it say?" she asked. There was no tremor now, only an order-sharped stillness. He folded the letter and slid it across the desk. She opened it for him without breaking eye contact. Her lips moved as she read, slow as if tasting every syllable. Her face tightened. A single exhale escaped between clenched teeth. She did not weep. She did not panic. She catalogued the implication like a surgeon assessing an injury. That night became a crucible. They talked in clipped sentences, not because they had nothing to say, But because language had to be precise now, there was no room for metaphor. They mapped options the way generals map terrain, weighing consequences and casualties. Even in his anger, Adrian tried to reason like a man solving a puzzle rather than a father-to-be reacting on impulse. Elena, for her part, focused on contingencies, escape routes, safe houses, verification of allies. They considered silence as a weapon and silence as a liability. Each plan they sketched exposed vulnerabilities. Every option seemed to narrow into the same brutal requirement. One of them must retreat for the other to survive. He thought of running, of disappearing into darker places where even whispers from his house could not reach. He thought of bargaining, trading territory, selling assets. He thought of the clean, surgical violence he could deploy to silence the threat. But each maneuver had a price tag he could not stomach now. Public devastation that would drag her into the open, collateral damage that could touch the innocent, and a surrender of privacy that would unmake the fragile life they'd built. In the corner of his mind, he heard his father's voice, careful, like a guillotine, explaining the virtue of sacrifice for the legacy. A legacy stained with other people's pain. That voice, that legacy, wanted him to obey. Elena assessed him with the sort of clear-eyed compassion that comes only from people who have known how to survive on their own. "We do not negotiate from a position that implies your submission to his will," she said quietly. "We cut the problem at its root." Her answer was not naive. Her plan, swift, cruel, efficient, far more brutal than any polite negotiation with a patriarchal monster. It involved exposing the family's buried cleavages, leveraging secrets, and risking a public rupture that could undo legacies. It was audacious. It was dangerous. It would ruin people. It might save them, they argued, not loudly but with the tilting ferocity of two forces that refused to collapse. He wanted to shield her from danger. She wanted him to be honest enough to accept that shielding might cost them both everything. In the end, neither surrendered. They chose instead to act like equals, sharing the burden even when the hour demanded unilateral sacrifice. That decision, solid and irrevocable, carved an axis around which every following move rotated. It was not the surrender his father expected. It was a refusal to be played. It was also, not incidentally, a declaration. They would not be pawns. When midnight came, they sealed their plans into the kind of silence that can be fatal and holy. He thought of the boy he would one day fail or save with the same ferocity that men protect their names. He thought of Elena's hands, steady, calloused at the edges from work, and how those hands had arranged him in ways no one else could. He heard, like a bell, the distant voice of someone who still believed the world should be ruled by fear and obedience. And he knew they had only hours before his father moved. They slept poorly, if at all. Dawn arrived gray and precise. The courier returned, small and unobtrusive, to say nothing, to deny nothing. Life in the tower continued. Meetings, invoices, men who would not know the war they had woken into. Adrian kept the letter locked away in his desk where it could not be seen. Yet the smell of wax and old paper followed him like a ghost. He moved in public like a man who'd decided to be brave by rote, commanding, unspeaking, immaculate. Inside, his thoughts were a field on fire, and then his phone buzzed on his desk. A second message. Another image. Another reminder that the family did not negotiate like ordinary people. He opened it with hands that no longer resembled his own. Elena in the corridor, laughing at something private, a small warmth in her face. Beneath the picture, a new sentence, as clean and brutal as a blade. If you don't end it, she dies. The empire that once trembled under Adrian Knight's command now quaked from within. His father's words had not been threats. They were prophecies carved in blood and logic. Old allies were defecting, financial arteries clogging, and whispers of mutiny ran through the corridors like smoke through keyholes. Adrian, once untouchable, now felt the invisible noose tightening. Every deal he made came laced with conditions. Every conversation ended in veiled reminders of who owned his fate. The family name that once shielded him had turned predator. ready to devour him and everything he loved. He spent nights in his office, unshaven, sleepless, staring at the skyline that had once bowed to him. Power had been his language, but now even his silence cost too much. Elena's presence had been his last refuge, yet the letter still burned in his desk like a hidden explosive. He could still hear his father's voice, "End it or she dies." The sentence repeated itself every time he closed his eyes. He could imagine his father's men, patient, clinical, watching her every move. They didn't threaten twice. Adrian had always believed he was incapable of love. Yet now, faced with losing it, he realized that love had made him human, and humanity was a liability in his world. Every instinct screamed to run to her, to defy the order, to take her hand and disappear. But his empire was more than ego. It was a living organism, fed by loyalty, blood, and fear. If he ran, it would collapse. If it collapsed, everyone tied to him, Elena included, would burn. That was the logic his father counted on, the trap disguised as choice. He poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. The amber light through the glass reminded him of her hair, the way sunlight had caught it on the morning they were married. His hand tightened. That memory, once soft, now felt like a weapon aimed at him. Love had become an enemy, a liability too dangerous to protect. He understood now what his father meant years ago when he'd said, "To lead, you must amputate what makes you weak." He hadn't realized back then that weakness had a heartbeat and a name. At dawn, Adrian walked into the penthouse bedroom for the last time. Elena was still asleep, her breathing steady, her hair fanned across the pillow like gold spilled on silk. The sight hollowed him. He wanted to memorize her as she was before the world broke them, unaware, untouched by betrayal. He stood over her for a long moment, the conflict inside him so violent it felt physical. He could hear his own heart beat louder than the city below. Every instinct screamed to stay, but staying would sign her death warrant. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, fingers trembling for the first time in years. Her lips parted slightly as if she were about to speak his name. That nearly destroyed him. He stepped back, fists clenched. His shadow stretched across the room like a confession. Then he turned and walked out without a word, leaving the door open behind him. His final act of cowardice and mercy mixed in equal measure. By the time Elena woke, the room already felt colder. She reached instinctively for the other side of the bed, empty. The sheets still warm but fading fast. "Adrian?" Her voice cracked the air like glass. No answer. The penthouse echoed, sterile, stripped of him. She searched the rooms, the corridors, even the balcony where he used to stand to watch the city burn below. He was nowhere. Not a note, not a trace. Just the silence of a man who had decided she wasn't part of his future. She called him once. Straight to voicemail, again, then again. Each unanswered ring hollowed her a little more. 20 calls later, her hands were shaking, the phone screen smeared with tears she didn't remember shedding. The last message she left was barely a whisper. "If this is goodbye, say it yourself." The silence afterward felt like a verdict. Elena stumbled into the bathroom, splashed cold water on her face, and caught her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like the one who'd married him. This one had shadows under her eyes, and the kind of calm that comes after shock. She pressed a hand to her stomach, where a quiet ache had been building for days. The realization hit her with brutal clarity. She wasn't alone anymore. A life was forming inside her, a secret, fragile heartbeat that made every choice heavier. Her mind spun with contradictions. How could someone who built empires be so afraid of love? How could he vanish without a word, knowing what they risked for each other? The pain was raw but clean, sharper than grief, deeper than anger. She whispered to her reflection, the words half a vow, half a dare, "You'll never need him." Then she turned, spine straightening as resolve settled in her bones. That afternoon, she disappeared. No notes, no goodbyes, no witnesses. She left Chicago with nothing but a suitcase, a hidden bank account, and the quiet fury of a woman who refused to be a casualty. She boarded a car heading south, its engine growling against the winter wind. The city receded behind her like a dying flame. She didn't look back. If Adrian wanted silence, she would give him the kind that echoed. In another part of the city, Adrian watched the same sky from his office window. His father's men had returned to stand guard at his door, a reminder of the leash now tightened around his neck. He told himself that leaving her would keep her safe, but the lie was beginning to splinter. Power tasted hollow. The calls from investors, the fear in his men's eyes, all of it seemed insignificant compared to the echo of her voice in his head. He told himself he couldn't reach out. He told himself he had done the right thing. He told himself he was saving her. Lies, every one of them, but lies are the currency of survival, and Adrian Knight was still rich. Miles away, Eleanor drove into the endless stretch of highway, the city lights dissolving in her rearview mirror. She gripped the wheel tightly, the world narrowing to the rhythm of the road and the hum of the tires. Her phone vibrated once, unknown number. She ignored it. Then again, the third time she answered, expecting his voice, praying and dreading it. Nothing but static. Then the line went dead. The road wound through an industrial district, the skyline fading into darkness. She glanced in the rearview mirror out of habit and froze. Headlights, one pair, steady, too close. She changed lanes. The car followed. Her pulse quickened. She took the next turn sharply, the tires screeching on wet asphalt. The headlights mirrored every move, keeping perfect distance. Someone was following her. She tried to rationalize it, coincidence, paranoia, city traffic. But the road had emptied. The other car stayed behind, unwavering, patient. Her hands tightened on the wheel. The pit of her stomach dropped. She reached for her phone to call the one man she swore never to call again, but then stopped. She couldn't, not after what he'd done. She needed to think, to act, to survive. At the next intersection, she turned off the headlights and veered into a side road flanked by warehouses. The air smelled of oil and rain. She pulled over, engine off, listening. The following cars slowed but didn't stop. It drifted past, vanishing into the night. Relief hit her in waves so fierce it made her dizzy. She leaned her forehead against the steering wheel, breathing hard. For a moment she believed she'd imagined it. Then a metallic tap hit the glass beside her. Elena's head snapped up. A shadow stood by her window, tall, still, faceless in the dark. A hand pressed something against the glass. A small silver ring. Her wedding ring. The shadow leaned closer, voice low and cold through the rain. Adrian Knight doesn't know I'm here. And before she could react, the window shattered. 5 years had passed since Adrian Knight burned his own world to save it. The Empire survived. He didn't. On paper, he was still a titan. His name etched in contracts, whispered in auctions, feared in meetings where men older than him flinched at his silence. But behind the glass walls of his office, his victories had the texture of ash. He sat before a table the color of ice, signing deals worth more than nations. But every flick of the pen only echoed one name in his head: Eleanor. Time hadn't erased her. It had carved her sharper. Chicago had changed. Skyscrapers grew like weeds. New kings rose. Old ones fell. And yet the city's heart beat with the same corruption that built it. Adrian had adapted. He wore precision like armor, tailored ruthlessness stitched into every decision. People called him colder now, more efficient, untouchable. They didn't realize that the absence inside him wasn't strength. It was the vacuum left by something he'd killed himself to protect. Love, once forbidden, had become a ghost that haunted his success. He had tried once to move on, to believe the lie that wealth could bury regret. Women came and went, beautiful, strategic, temporary, but none stayed past the moment they saw the look in his eyes, a man staring at something that wasn't there. His men whispered that their boss had gone quiet, that his eyes no longer sparked before deals, that the Mafia's Ice King was becoming too human for his own safety. But Adrian didn't care. You don't fear what you've already lost. It was late afternoon when the world decided to change again. The city below shimmered with rain light, and the giant screen across from his office flickered to life with breaking news. Adrian barely glanced up at first. He'd seen enough markets crash and ministers resign. Then he heard the anchor's voice. Elena Grace Industries, Chicago's newest empire of influence. The name hit him like a bullet disguised as a headline. His hand froze mid-signature, pen bleeding ink onto the contract. He turned his head slowly toward the screen, every breath a countdown. There she was, Elena Grace, alive, radiant, untouchable. The camera loved her, but not the way he once did. This was a woman reborn from ruin, sculpted by fire and time. Her presence commanded rooms now, her poise sharper than the diamonds at her throat. She stood behind a podium bearing her company's name, announcing a merger that would shift Chicago's financial core, his core. She hadn't just survived, she'd conquered the city he once ruled. Adrian's reflection in the glass looked alien as he watched her speak. The same lips that once whispered his name now spoke in calculated power. She'd become everything he feared and admired, his mirror in ambition, his opposite in purpose. But it wasn't her success that hollowed him. It was the moment she stepped aside to let two small figures into the frame. Two little boys, maybe 4 years old, identical, with pale hair and eyes as blue and cold as his own. The world narrowed to a heartbeat. He didn't breathe. Couldn't. The resemblance wasn't chance. It was accusation. Two faces he had never seen but somehow already knew. They looked around with the wary confidence of children raised by a lioness. And when the camera panned closer, one of them turned, just slightly, and Adrian's world cracked open. Those eyes, his eyes, the same shade that had made enemies hesitate, now set in faces innocent enough to make his chest hurt. For a moment, sound vanished. The world outside his office blurred. He tried to rationalize it, coincidence, mistake. But the truth rose like smoke. Elena hadn't disappeared to run. She'd disappeared to rebuild, to protect, to raise his legacy in a house without his name. He replayed the segment again, over and over, refusing to blink. The twins laughed on camera, pulling at their mother's hand as she smiled. A real, unguarded smile, the kind she used to save for him. Something inside him broke cleanly, like glass under pressure. He should have felt anger or pride or something he could weaponize. But all he felt was distance, the unbearable knowledge that life had gone on without him. A knock on the door startled him. His second in command, Victor, stepped in, eyes flicking toward the frozen screen. "Boss, are we expanding into her sector?" His tone was careful. The men downstairs would already have noticed the headline, the resemblance. Adrian didn't answer. He simply stood, walked to the window and stared at the skyline. "No," he said finally. "Not yet." The pause that followed was a war. He dismissed Victor with a glance and sat back down. His pulse was steady, but his thoughts weren't. He needed answers, confirmation. Every instinct that had made him a legend came roaring back, now repurposed for something rawer. He made a few calls, quiet ones, to men who owed him favors in high places. Within an hour, he had what he needed, confirmation that Elena Grace Industries had risen from obscurity 4 years ago, founded by an unknown woman using seed capital from foreign investors. Anonymous donors, ruthless efficiency, flawless execution. In 5 years, she had built what took him 10, and she'd done it under his nose. The irony wasn't lost on him. She'd learned from him better than anyone. Discipline, strategy, the art of fear disguised as charm. She'd turned his methods into her empire, but what twisted the knife wasn't betrayal. It was admiration. Elena had beaten him at his own game, and made sure he'd find out when it hurt most. Adrian leaned back, eyes closing. Memories came unbidden, her laughter, her touch, the way she'd once said power was only worth it if it didn't cost your soul. He'd mocked her for that. Now she was living proof she'd been right. His empire, built on silence, suddenly felt small. The phone on his desk buzzed once. Unknown number, no caller ID. He hesitated only a second before answering. Night. For a moment, nothing, just the faint static of distance. Then a voice, soft and deliberate, threaded through the line. She doesn't forgive you. Adrian's grip on the phone tightened. The voice was female, calm, familiar, and neither do they. A chill went through him, colder than anything in 5 years of solitude. Who is this? He demanded, though part of him already knew. The voice on the line gave a quiet, humorless laugh. You'll see soon enough. The call ended. Silence swelled, thick and electric. Adrian's reflection in the glass looked pale, haunted. He replayed the words again, searching for cracks in meaning. She doesn't forgive you, and neither do they. It wasn't a threat. It was a verdict. He looked back at the frozen image on the screen. Elena, composed and untouchable, her sons beside her like twin omens. The weight of everything he'd done pressed against his ribs until he couldn't breathe. He'd built empires, destroyed families, outplayed rivals, but he'd never faced judgment from the only ones who had the right to deliver it. The city lights flickered outside, mirroring the pulse in his temples. Somewhere below, rain began to fall, soft, deliberate, inevitable. Adrian rose from his chair, walked to the glass, and pressed his palm against the cold surface. Where are you, Elena? He murmured. His phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time a message. One photo. It was his office, taken from across the street. Him at the window, hand against the glass. The caption below read, They already found you, and the lights in his office went out. The night split open with gunfire. Chicago hadn't seen a war like this in years. Streets bleeding red and blue lights, sirens howling through smoke. Adrian's men were scrambling to contain the chaos when his radio crackled with a name he'd buried inside his heart. Elena Grace, injured. St. Vincent's Hospital. Everything stopped. The sound of gunfire. The shouting, even the pulse in his veins, frozen. The name echoed, slicing through the years he'd spent pretending she was gone. Adrian didn't ask for details. He didn't issue orders. He just grabbed his keys and vanished into the storm. The city blurred around him as he drove. Tires screamed across wet asphalt. Traffic lights flashed meaningless colors. His mind was static, white noise of rage, guilt, and fear. Each second between him and that hospital felt like a countdown to something irreversible. He'd lost her once by choice. If fate was cruel enough to make him lose her again, he'd burned the city that bore witness. By the time he reached St. Vincent's, the hospital was chaos, doctors rushing, patients crying, armed guards blocking entrances. He shoved past them all. Adrian Knight, he barked, flashing the insignia ring that made men hesitate. It worked. They didn't ask questions. The fluorescent corridors stretched endlessly, sterile and bright. His footsteps echoed off tile floors, each one louder than his breath. He didn't know what he'd find. Elena broken, bleeding, gone. But the thought was unbearable. Rage and terror fused into one primal need, to see her. He turned a corner and saw her name scrawled on a temporary chart outside a door. Elena Grace, Observation Room 14. His hand hovered over the handle. For a second, the Mafia King who had stared down death itself couldn't move. He was afraid, not of what waited inside, but of what it would do to him. Then he pushed the door open. The room wasn't filled with machines or blood or panic. It was quiet, almost painfully so. The world seemed to hold its breath, and in the middle of it, sitting upright on the hospital bed, was her Elena alive. Her hair was messy, her face pale, but her eyes, those fierce, steady eyes, lifted to his like she'd been expecting him all along. She didn't speak. Neither did he. The silence between them was heavier than any gunshot outside. The years collapsed in an instant, leaving only what they'd been and what they'd lost. Then he saw them. Two tiny forms nestled in her arms, wrapped in white blankets, newborns, Their chests rose and fell in fragile rhythm, their faces soft with sleep. But what froze Adrian, what shattered everything he thought he understood, were their eyes. When one stirred and blinked up at him, he saw his own reflection, the same piercing blue, the same defiance. His breath caught in his throat. No denial could save him. No logic could explain it away. They were his. He staggered back a step, words clawing up his throat. Elena. It came out rough, strangled. She didn't look away, didn't flinch. You left, she said softly. No accusation, just a fact, one sharp enough to cut him open. And now you see what you abandoned. He wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize, but nothing came. The man who commanded armies couldn't find a single word that mattered. He stared at the children, his sons, as disbelief turned into awe, then into something far darker. Fear, wonder, regret. How? His voice broke before he could finish. Her gaze hardened. You think the world stopped when you walked away? No, Adrian, it started over. She shifted one of the babies gently, her movements protective, almost territorial. And they were my reason to survive. He stepped closer, eyes locked on the boys. His sons. The reality hit like a punch. He hadn't just lost a woman. He'd lost a family. His legacy had been growing, breathing, living without him. His empire suddenly felt meaningless beside the fragile perfection in her arms. But something was wrong. Adrian's instincts, the ones that had kept him alive through decades of betrayal, flared to life. Beneath the sterile hospital scent, he could sense it. Tension. Something unsaid, unguarded. The way the nurse in the corner avoided eye contact. The faint hum of static from a device on the wall. The room felt too still, too controlled. Like a trap disguised as peace. Elena, he said quietly, scanning the shadows. Who brought you here? She hesitated, just enough for him to notice. An ambulance, she said finally, voice too steady. After the explosion near the bridge, I woke up here. Adrian's jaw tightened. Explosion, not crossfire. Someone had targeted her. And if she'd been found, if her location had leaked, it meant the people hunting him might already know she was alive. He moved closer to the window, pushing the blinds aside. Outside, across the street, a black sedan sat idling, headlights dimmed. No insignia, no plates. He'd seen that kind of car too many times before. It belonged to ghosts, not civilians. Elena, he said again, lower this time, turning back to her. We need to leave. Her expression flickered between confusion and anger. You show up after 5 years and give orders. You don't get to, he cut her off, voice like steel. They know you're here. The color drained from her face. She clutched the children tighter, maternal instinct overtaking fury. Adrian pulled out his phone, already dialing his men. We're getting out, but before he could finish, one of the babies stirred. The smaller one. A faint sound escaped his lips, almost a whimper. His tiny hand reached up, fingers curling around something glinting in the blanket. A chain. Adrian froze as the silver caught the dim light. A locket. Elena followed his gaze. Her breath hitched. The baby held it tight, as if it were instinct, something ancient and known. Adrian reached out, brushing the edge of it with trembling fingers. The metal was cold, unmistakable. He turned it just enough to see the engraving. His family crest, the night sigil, the same one carved into every empire deal, every blood pact, every grave he'd ever made. For a heartbeat, the world was silent again. Then Adrian looked at Elena, eyes narrowing as realization sank in. Where did he get this? Her lips parted, but no sound came. Outside, the rain intensified, streaking against the glass like falling ash. The tension in the room thickened until even the air felt dangerous. Elena, he whispered, almost afraid of the answer. Who gave it to him? She didn't reply. Her gaze drifted toward the window. And in that exact moment, the lights in the hallway flickered. A shadow moved past the glass. Then, before Adrian could reach for his gun, the hospital intercom crackled to life with a distorted voice that made every muscle in his body lock up. Mr. Knight, it said, cold and metallic. You found your family. Now let's see if you can keep them. And from outside, the black sedan's headlights turned on. Both beams pointed straight at their window. The silence between them was suffocating. Adrian stood near the hospital window. His reflection fractured in the glass. A man once feared by empires, now broken by the only woman who had ever truly known him. The storm outside thrashed against the panes, but it was nothing compared to the one inside him. Why? His voice cracked, a sound foreign to him, a wound made audible. For years he'd spoken like a king giving orders. Now it sounded like confession. Elena didn't look up. Her tone was cold, even unshaken. Because I stopped waiting. The words sliced through the room like a knife. Adrian felt the weight of them in his bones. For 5 years, he'd built walls of denial, convinced himself she was safer without him. That distance was protection. But seeing her now, stronger, colder, radiant in defiance, he realized he hadn't been saving her. He'd been saving himself. You think this was easy for me? He said, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. You think I didn't die every day knowing you didn't die? Elena interrupted, her eyes finally rising to meet his. You just walked away and called it sacrifice. The air crackled between them. She had fire in her eyes, a fire that had once been love but was now forged into armor. She turned toward the small cradle beside the bed. The twins slept soundly, unaware that their parents were circling each other like ghosts over a grave. She brushed a finger against one child's cheek, a soft, protective touch that made Adrian's chest ache. I built everything I have, she said quietly, while carrying what you left behind. The company, the name, the strength, all of it from the ashes you created. He wanted to argue, to explain, to tell her the truth, that leaving her had been the only way to keep her alive. But every excuse sounded like cowardice now, Elena. He took a step forward. You have to believe me. I believe you. Her laugh was sharp and hollow. The man who vanished without a word? Who left me to clean up the blood you spilled? He froze. Elena's eyes softened for only a second, just enough to show the pain beneath her armor. I used to dream you'd come back, she admitted. Then I realized you were never coming. So I built something that would never need you. Adrian's throat tightened. He saw the truth behind her words, the loneliness, the nights she must have faced alone, pregnant and hunted. And he hated himself for it. He looked at the twins again, a flash of longing breaking through the guilt. They're mine, he said, voice barely above a whisper. They're not possessions, she shot back. They're people. They're my world now. The way she said mine made something inside him fracture. She reached into her bag and pulled out a white envelope. The sound of the paper against her fingers was louder than the storm. She placed it on the table between them, an invisible line drawn in ink and heartbreak. You built your empire with signatures, she said, her tone steady. And it the same way. Adrian stared at it. He didn't need to open it to know what it was. Divorce papers. The word felt like a blade pressed to his throat. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Elena, he murmured. You're really doing this? She crossed her arms, her posture calm, but her voice trembling with buried rage. I already did. He finally tore his eyes from the papers and looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman standing before him wasn't the assistant he'd fallen for. She was a queen now, forged from betrayal and pain, standing tall over the ruins of what he'd once controlled. I never wanted this, he said. You wanted everything but this, she replied coldly. You chose power over love, control over truth. You wanted to own me, Adrian, and when you couldn't, you walked away. He stepped closer, his voice low, raw. I left because I thought it would keep you safe. She laughed again, a bitter, disbelieving sound. Then tell me, did your safety plan include the people who followed me that night? The ones you didn't send? Adrian froze. His eyes darkened. What did you say? Her voice wavered now just slightly. The night I left Chicago. Someone was tailing me. I thought it was your men, but later I realized it wasn't. Adrian's chest tightened. Pieces of old threats snapped into place. His father's final warnings, the alliances he'd broken. The same forces that wanted Elena gone 5 years ago might have never stopped watching. "Elena," he said quietly, stepping closer, "you were never supposed to be part of that war." She looked at him with a weary smile. "But I was, because I loved you," he swallowed hard. Words burned at the back of his throat, but refused to come out. He had no defense left, no crown heavy enough to hide behind. The rain outside thundered louder as if the city itself was listening. Finally, she picked up the envelope and pressed it against his chest. "Sign it," she said, "and let me go before the past kills what's left of us." Adrian didn't take it. He couldn't. The Mafia Boss, the untouchable ruler of Chicago, stood helpless before a single sheet of paper. "Elena, don't do this." Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but resolve. "You already did, Adrian." The words hung in the air like smoke. He looked down at the envelope in his hands, the white paper trembling slightly as he held it. Every instinct screamed at him to rip it apart, to fight for her, for their children, for the pieces of a life he'd thrown away. But his hands didn't move. Then he noticed something strange. The envelope was heavier than it should have been, thicker. He frowned. "What's this?" Elena didn't answer. She turned away, her shoulders stiff. Adrian slowly tore it open. The papers inside slid free. 2 sets, not one. The top page was what he expected, the divorce. Her signature scrawled in black ink beside his printed name. But beneath it was another document. His heart stopped when he saw the bold black stamp across the header. Custody. The words stared back at him, cold and final. His pulse spiked. The edges of the page trembled between his fingers. "Elena." His voice was low, dangerous. "What is this?" She faced him then, her eyes fierce and glimmering with defiance. "It's what you taught me, Adrian. Power isn't given. It's taken." He stared at her, the realization crashing down like thunder. She wasn't just leaving him, she was erasing him. "Elena, don't—" "I have to," she said quietly. "You ruled a kingdom built on fear. I built one on survival. And now you'll understand what losing everything really feels like." The storm outside howled. The lights flickered once. Adrian's hand clenched around the papers, veins pulsing under his skin. "You think I'll let this happen?" he whispered. Elena met his gaze, unflinching. "You already did." And before he could speak again, his phone vibrated violently on the table. A message flashed on the screen. No name, just a single photo. 2 silver lockets lying on wet concrete, snapped open, empty. Beneath it, 4 words chilled his blood. "You're already too late." The city didn't sleep that night. Neither did Adrian. The storm outside the penthouse windows mirrored the one behind his eyes. Thunder rolling, lightning flashing across the skyline like gunfire. He sat at the edge of his desk, jaw clenched, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand. The name on his phone screen glowed like poison. Luca Romano, his most trusted man, his shadow for years, the one who had buried bodies beside him and laughed at death. Now his name tasted like betrayal. The report had come from his informant in the docks, a whisper, quiet but fatal. Luca had been selling information to the Vescari family for months, including Elena's travel routes, her security details, her new identity. The pieces slid together in Adrian's mind like the cold click of a loaded gun. He called for Luca to come in. The man entered with his usual swagger. Tailored suit, slick hair, smile sharp as a knife. "You wanted to see me, boss?" Adrian didn't look up at first. He let the silence stretch, a noose tightening in the air. Then he finally spoke, voice low, measured, almost too calm. "You sold her." Luca laughed under his breath, feigning confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about." Adrian's fist came down on the desk, splintering the wood. The glass toppled, spilling amber across the papers. Don't lie to me. Their eyes locked, predator and prey, though both had worn both masks before. Finally, Luca exhaled, a small smile curling on his lips. You taught me everything about loyalty, Adrian, about how it's just another currency. You betrayed your own wife. I just learned from the best. Adrian's pulse thundered in his temples. Every word hit like a bullet. He rose slowly, step by step, until they stood inches apart. You think betrayal makes you powerful, he hissed. It makes you disposable. Before Luca could react, Adrian slammed him against the wall, forearm pressing into his throat. Luca laughed, even as blood trickled down from his split lip. You can't save her, he choked out. They've already taken what matters. Adrian's grip tightened, fury trembling through his veins. Who? Luca's grin widened, teeth crimson. You'll see soon enough. A gunshot split the air, echoing through the penthouse. Adrian lowered the smoking pistol, watching Luca's body crumple to the marble floor. The silence that followed was deafening, but before Luca's eyes glazed over completely, he muttered one last word, barely audible, almost swallowed by blood. Twins! Adrian's heart stopped. He turned, grabbing his phone. The line to his security chief was dead. No signal. Every instinct screamed. Something was wrong. Minutes later, he was tearing through the city in his black Aston Martin, tires slicing through puddles, engine roaring like thunder. Rain hammered against the windshield, blurring the world into streaks of gray and red. He dialed Elena's number, once, twice, 10 times. No answer. Then he called her head of security. Static. Another call. Disconnected. The last ping from... Her GPS came from the I-90 highway, 20 minutes north of Chicago. After that, silence. He sped through the night, eyes scanning the road for anything. A skid mark, a flash of metal, a sign of life. The deeper he drove, the more the world seemed to vanish around him. Streetlights flickered out one by one. The city gave way to emptiness, industrial wastelands and cracked asphalt. And then he saw it, Elena's convoy, 3 SUVs, sprawled across the road like corpses of steel. Headlights shattered, smoke curling into the rain. The smell of gasoline hung thick in the air. Adrian jumped out of the car before it stopped moving, weapon drawn. Elena, he shouted, voice echoing through the storm. No answer. Bodies lay scattered, his men, her guards, gunfire residue on the ground, a clean, professional hit. Whoever did this wasn't reckless. They wanted precision. They wanted her. He moved fast, checking every vehicle. In the last SUV, he found a trail of blood leading into the trees. Fresh. He followed it, each step heavier than the last, breath misting in the cold air. Then suddenly his phone buzzed. A message. No name, just a video file. He hesitated, fingers trembling, then pressed play. The screen flickered. The image was shaky, dark, filmed from a distance. But he knew that voice before he saw her face. Elena. Her lips were bruised, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. Her hands were tied, her breath uneven. She looked straight into the camera, not with fear, but with fury restrained by pain. Don't come for me, she whispered, her voice hoarse, cracking. Behind her, shadows moved. Faceless men in black, rifles glinting under a single hanging light. Then she forced a small, broken smile. They want the twins. The video ended. Adrian stood frozen, rain soaking through his clothes, phone clutched tight in his fist. His reflection shimmered on the cracked screen. The face of a man who had built an empire of fear, only to lose the only thing that ever mattered. Lightning flashed across the sky. illuminating the ruined road, the bodies, the chaos, and something else. A symbol painted on the overturned SUV in red, the same crest that hung in his father's study. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. His pulse slowed to a deadly calm. This wasn't just revenge, it was war, from within his own bloodline. And as the thunder rolled overhead, his phone buzzed once more, a text from an unknown number. Next time, we take them too. Adrian moved through the city like a force of nature unleashed. He left a wake of sirens and splintered asphalt behind him. Every informant he had was on call. Every alley had ears tuned to his fury. He didn't ask permission. He issued commands that men obeyed without question. The air smelled of rain and gunpowder as he ripped through districts that had once bowed to his name. He sent men to lock down bridges and airports, to comb through traffic footage and toll cameras. Explosions became background noise to the single thought that burned hotter than anything else: find the boys. He tolerated no delays, no excuses, no hesitation, because hesitation cost lives. A convoy of armored cars flanked his vehicle as he drove himself. Nothing would keep him from moving. He kept his face still, but inside every memory he had of Elena and the small, unnamed futures they might have had detonated. He replayed the video over and over in his head while the city slid by. Elena bound, whispering the shadowed men, the dangling hint about New York. The dockyard smelled of salt, rust, and old secrets by the time his men found the abandoned warehouse. He arrived to chaos, discarded shell casings, ripped fabric, a trail of footprints leading into black corridors. Adrenaline pushed him beyond pain. Every nerve was tuned to a single, brutal focus. They moved like specters through the warehouse, guns raised, lights slicing stale air into wet beams. A hush fell over his team when they found signs of a struggle: a child's blanket snagged on a nail, the imprint of small shoes in the dust. He stooped to touch the blanket and felt the cold ache of a father who'd been absent when his own sons couldn't afford absence. No mercy existed in his instincts now, only a raw need to restore what had been stolen. They followed the trail to docks, where shipping containers made a maze of metal and shadow. Men with hostile intent had planned escape routes. Adrian planned around them with a surgeon's precision. He split his squad into 3 teams: containment, breach, extraction, and kept the most trusted moments away from sight. A scanner chirped. An image flickered. Surveillance from a rooftop showed a van driving off, plates blurred. It was a chessboard, and he had to make the next 3 moves perfectly. He fed orders into his earpiece and listened to the city answer with rubber and steel. Under the fluorescent glare of a malfunctioning lamp, Elena lay slumped against a stack of crates when Adrian found her. Her hair was matted with blood and rain, her cheek marked with a bruise that spoke of hurried violence. She lifted her head, and for an instant the past and present collided in a look that held both accusation and apology. "Are they?" he began, but her shadowed eyes stopped him. "They're gone," she said, voice thin and hard as wire. Her words landed like a blow and echoed in the place where hope had lived. He swallowed a response that could have destroyed him. His throat was dry from running. How far? He demanded, because distance meant leverage, and leverage meant a chance. She picked at the knot that bound her wrists and looked at him with a clarity sharpened by pain. "New York," she answered, the name a canyon between them. His world narrowed to the syllables of that single city, New York, with its labyrinth of towers and anonymity. It was bigger than Chicago, older and more crowded. It was exactly the kind of place where someone could disappear deliberately. His men moved like clockwork to trace the van's dot on maps, calling in favors and opening lines that ran cold 5 years ago. Adrian felt time like a physical thing pressing on his spine, a vice that left no room for hesitation. He considered options with the speed of a man who had learned to decide while worlds burned around him. There were safe houses to check, ports to block, civilian cameras to hack, and he ordered every avenue opened. A muffled tone came from his coat pocket. Luca's voice filled the grimy air as if he were still standing there smirking. "You have 6 hours, Adrian," Luca said through a speaker dragged across the floor like an accusation. "Trade your empire, or your sons die," the voice continued with a patience that made the blood in Adrian's veins freeze. For a second the warehouse held only the sound of the speaker and the racing of his heart. Men around him lowered their guns as if fear were contagious. A plan collapsed the moment Luca spoke. "You're lying," Adrian snarled, but the tone had no teeth. The voice was clinical, final. Luca's laughter was a ragged thing filtered through static. "You always underestimate how thin the threads of loyalty are." 1,000 betrayals unspooled in Adrian's mind in the space of a breath. Old promises, sold favors, the soft betrayals that become a cascade. He thought of the men who had fallen for his sake, the faces he'd written off, the debts unpaid in blood. He thought of the dumb, terrible things he'd done when he believed power was protection, and realized those choices had collateralized his heart. Every cell in him screamed to rip the man who'd said those words to pieces. But the timer Luca had offered was real and cruel. Time tightened its grip around the rescue like a rope tightening a noose. He could call in more men, more guns, more firepower. He could burn half the city and still not get those hours back. Adrian wrenched his gaze to Elena, watching how she held herself upright despite the weight of her injuries. There was a softness in the way she protected the memory of laughter that once lived in their life, and it made his chest fracture again. "You should have stayed hidden," he muttered, because blame was a tool he still tried to use. She flinched but didn't look away. "Hiding is a quiet death," she said. "I would rather make noise and be found than pretend I never existed." He listened to that and understood the cost of both choices in a way he hadn't when he left. A path to New York required resources he didn't have at hand but could conjure. With the right calls, he made them quick, cold, efficient. The way men of his world moved when stakes became personal. He handed off commands to 3 captains and told them to act like criminals and saints interchangeably. They would intercept a flight, shadow a courier, tow GPS pings until someone slipped. Every second shaved off his time was a second carved from hope. A private jet would be commandeered. A shipping manifest would be falsified. A midtown safe house would be hit with the precision of a scalpel. Adrian trusted people like extensions of himself. Now he trusted them as lifelines. He strapped on his gear and said nothing about heartbreak, because noise had no place in the plan. The drive to the airport was a blur of rain-streaked windows and taillights. His world reduced to a windshield and a destination. He thought of calling his father, of dragging the old man into the wreckage he had crafted, but fury taught him silence. Involving the patriarch would tip the balance in ways he couldn't control. Instead, he called old allies, men who owed him more than money, and bought a set of favors that smelled of grease and loyalty. There was brutality in the way he orchestrated movement, like a conductor of armed angels, each note precise and merciless. In a downtown safe house, his techs were already burning through logs, tracing the van's last confirmed coordinates into a web of digital breadcrumbs. They found a contraband shipment bound for an industrial pier, then a passenger manifest with an anonymous booking, then a courier, then a dead end. Someone had erased the obvious and left only riddles. Someone had planned to lure him into wasting hours on false leads. Adrian recognized the signature method, calculated, misdirection layered over cruelty. He felt his stomach knot as he realized their captors wanted 2 outcomes, his fear and his spectacle. To trade power for sons was what Luca demanded, and Luca had always loved theater. The sun dipped low as he moved, an orange blade across an iron skyline, and he felt the hours like teeth grinding down toward bone. At a pier on the north side, a container vessel waited like a sleeping beast, and his men moved aboard under cover of dusk. They cleared the deck with surgical swiftness, every movement rehearsed until automatic. He found a hell of paperwork, and a crew paid to look the other way. Men with cold palms who lied with eyes open. They interrogated, threatened, and found a courier who cried when the knife hovered near his throat and then sang in a whisper about a transfer to a private trucking firm. The name of the company was a ghost on paper, but alive in a database they cracked with enough firepower. Trucks moved north. GPS showed a convoy threading into the arterial roads toward the interstate. Adrian set up intercepts and staged ambushes. He would hit the convoy long before it reached its interstate shelter. His men readied explosives and tracking devices. His pilots plotted flight paths over the corridor the trucks would take. Everything moved according to design until the truck convoys split and the lead lost signal. A new puzzle emerged. A trap inside a trap, a false route that would strand his men in a field of open sky. He pivoted, changed plans, rerouted teams, and sent a small unit ahead to hold a choke point until he could arrive. One of his captains, a man named Farid, caught a glimpse of movement in the cornfield beside the road and radioed a warning. An ambush erupted with the smell of cordite and the taste of iron. Men he trusted fell like rag dolls into shadow. Adrian answered with thunder. He called for air support, for diversion, for anything that would buy him space. He cut through the chaos and reached the choke point to find bodies and a trail that curved toward the old rail yards. He followed it, the blood and soil telling him a story of hurried transfer and a plan that had expected him to panic. A single footprint led into a maintenance shed and then into darkness, and his men moved in as if being pulled by the gravity of a single needed outcome. He found bindings, a torn swaddle, the faint scent of milk, and felt the world tilt in a way it had never tilted before. The cries of wounded men around him were a dull hum compared to the thought that his sons might already be in another state, another city, another person's hands. He felt old guilt sharpen into a weapon, and he used it, made it part of how he fought. Each lead now burned faster. Time was a quantifiable enemy with teeth and patience. He used every resource he had: corrupt pilots, crooked dockhands, a senator's aide who owed him favors, a contact who ran a private clinic in Brooklyn. Footsteps beat a rhythm through terminals and alleyways as his search came to resemble a man excavating his own history. They hit a tip that smelled like hope, a broker who trafficked people south to Midtown, safe houses, a face he recognized from an old ledger gave up a truck route in exchange for promises and fear. They drove through the night and crossed state lines with the kind of speed and legality that transforms chaos into a trajectory. New York felt like a different animal, taller, louder, indifferent to his name. He felt small there in a way the lakefront skyline had never allowed him to feel. He communicated in fragments with Elena when he could. Short messages, a name, a coordinate, any tether to keep her from collapsing. Her replies were sparse but sharp. She sent locations, snippets of overheard conversation, little things that were breathing holes in the dark. They used those holes to wedge plans into place. A hotel in Queens with a late-night delivery door, an address linked to a church van, a storage unit rented under a fake name. He learned to navigate the city's arteries by scent and sound, by the way. Subway stations hummed at night and the way cops shifted on beats during shift change. He bribed a sanitation worker to leave a trash bin open and crawled through a maze of alleys into a loading bay where a van waited with tinted glass. The van's lock clicked open under the touch of one of his men, and the smell of detergent and baby powder hit him like a tether he almost choked on. Inside the van, empty car seats, a stray crayon, a cheap stuffed bear, evidence of a plan meant to keep life looking ordinary until the deal closed. He scoured the van for DNA, for a thread, for any sign that would lead to the boys, but found only clever misdirection. Someone had been meticulous. Latches greased, GPS jammers installed, burner phones prepped across town. His text pinged a signal that suggested the children had been moved to a midtown townhouse with a garage that opened at precise minutes. He coordinated a hit with teams positioned to stop the flow at the garage and sweep the townhouse. Simultaneously, the plan was clean, quick, designed for success, until a civilian alarm tripped at the garage, and the sound turned the operation into a noisy scramble. A neighbor flipped on lights, and the night turned theatrical. The target slipped out a back alley in the confusion. He cursed the neighbor, the luck, the way small human variables undermined the best-laid plans. They chased the scent of the van through a labyrinth of service roads. His men tired and bleeding but relentless. At last, a lead came from an unexpected source. A delivery driver who'd seen two men in a black sedan hand off a small bundle to a man with an accent. The accent narrowed possibilities. The accent suggested a broker who trafficked children through a network tied to a warehouse in Sunset Park. Adrian moved like a man on a descending timer, precise, clinical, singular. They found the warehouse with its corrugated metal and smell of old oil and secrets, and the scene looked like a place where people who did things for money traded in human futures. His team breached with silent tactics, stacking at the door and sweeping in with steel and authority. They found shackles, toys thrown into a corner, and a mural of graffiti that tried and failed to make the place look like art. Footsteps echoed down a narrow corridor, and then a sound cut through that wasn't his. A child's cry, muffled, small, and human. He moved toward it like a man magnetized to the only sound that mattered. They kicked open a side door, and there, tied to a chair under a thin light, one of the boys whimpered and blinked at the sudden glare. Adrian's knees wanted to fail, but he held himself upright with the force of a man reassembling his soul. He rushed to the child and scooped him up, feeling the weight of small bones and the warmth of a pulse that belonged to him. The boy curled into him like he recognized the shape of safety in the curve of a stranger's shoulder. Relief flared, brief and violent, but it did not last. There was no sign of the second boy. A thread of panic pulled at Adrian's mind. If one was here, where was the other? He searched the room with a fury that bordered on madness, tearing through crates and cords and the detritus of criminal commerce. His men covered exits, and radios squawked like bees. Every phone in the building buzzed with incoming calls and dead-end leads. Then the radio hissed a voice he knew, Elena's, quieter than he'd ever heard it. She spoke coordinates in a broken whisper, a place he hadn't had time to get to. Farther, she said. He's farther. Adrian swore and kicked a crate until splinters flew. The sound of wood against floorboards felt obscene in the presence of his son. He looked at the child in his arms and promised in a voice that was not just for the room but for himself. I will find him. I will find them both. Outside, police sirens sang closer, and the warehouse filled with the pressure of daylight approaching and the inevitability of legal consequences. He radioed extraction, secured witnesses, and arranged for discreet movement to keep the child away from prying eyes. Even as men cuffed low-level operators, his focus was on the one hole in the net, the missing boy. In the back of his mind, the echo of Luca's words hammered like a metronome counting down to something final. He made his choices fast, split the team, take one son to safety, send another unit after the shadowy broker Elena had described. A plane's drone hummed overhead. A black car idled with a driver who had sworn loyalty years ago and now owed more than money. They traced the coordinates Elena provided to a small safe house where a burner phone last pinged. It led to a private broker in Queens with a contract that read like a ledger of broken promises. He barged into that address with steel and certainty and found only an empty room and a smudged napkin with a scribbled address, Brighton Beach. His stomach dropped into an ocean of dread. Brighton Beach meant crossing crowded promenades and noisy boardwalks where time could be lost. He moved there with the kind of pace that eats sleep and sanity. Every minute was a resource to hoard. At a seedy pier, cafe, under the jaundiced glow of a neon sign, a man with an accent slid into Adrian's path with the aplomb of someone who had trafficked hope and sold pieces of futures. The man smiled like he had teeth to spare. "You look like a father desperate for a miracle," he said. Adrian didn't answer. His hand found the barrel of a gun hidden in his jacket, and he leaned in until the man's breath hit his face. "Where is he?" Adrian demanded, each syllable a hammer. The man shrugged like a page in a play. "You have money?" "You will tell me where my son is before I run out of time," Adrian said. And the man's smirk faltered. They traded threats and promises, and finally a name leaked, a broker's contact who used a church van to shuffle children across boroughs on Sundays. The trail tightened into a pattern of liturgical schedules and corrupt volunteers who turned a blind eye for envelopes of cash. He found the van hidden behind a row of rental trucks and heard the muffled sound of a child through its walls. He walked around and there, like a terrible pivot of fate, he saw a pair of shoes by the van's back doors, one small, one tiny. He pulled the doors open, and light spilled out onto the boardwalk like a lie exposed. Inside, empty car seats, straps dangling, a folded blanket with a name tag, his name stitched inside. Silence hit him so hard it turned his knees to water. Then his phone buzzed, one incoming call from an unknown number, and, for the first time in a long while, he didn't answer because sometimes the ringing is the thing that tells you what you're not ready to hear. Instead, he listened to the sea and the distant sound of children playing, and realized his world had narrowed to this impossible shore. He felt both victory and failure at once. He had one son, but the other remained a ghost slipping through a city that was too big to cage. He turned away from the empty van and ran, until his lungs burned and his shoes slid on wet wood toward the last coordinate. Elena had given the promise he made to himself as he ran. Through the night was as simple and as savage as revenge. He would take back what had been taken, whatever the cost. A rumble of distant thunder matched the beat in his chest as he reached the place the coordinate indicated, an old freight elevator behind a shuttered warehouse. He pried it open and descended into a shaft that smelled of iron and diesel and old mechanized breath. At the bottom was a corridor lined with doors, each numbered and anonymous. One remained ajar, and light spilled like a wound. He pushed it open and found himself face to face with a man he had seen before in the slow motion of his worst decisions. Luca, alive, smirking, hands raised as if in surrender. Behind Luca, in a small cot, a bundle shifted and then a tiny face blinked up at the ceiling lights. For a moment, Adrian felt the relief of triumph crash through him, so overwhelming it almost toppled him. Then Luca spoke, calm as a surgeon, and the words were a scalpel. "You made it, boss." Right on schedule. Adrian's mind tried to outrun the dread that quickened in his gut. Knowing nothing about rescue, ever came free from cost, Luca's eyes glinted not with fear but with a triumph that had been paid for in 1,000 small betrayals. Adrian breached the circle like a force of nature and grabbed the child, feeling weight and small warmth and the fragile fact of breath. He pulled the boy tight to his chest, and the sound of the child's small cry became a kind of music, one that would haunt him forever with its sweetness and the memory of absence. Behind them, Luca smiled like a man who'd just won a game he'd been setting up for years. Adrian could have ended him then, He could have cut the man away from the world with knife or bullet. What stopped him wasn't mercy, but calculation, the knowledge that slaughter would be a spectacle and the next move of the war would be bloodier. For it, he cuffed Luca with a calm so cold it was nearly respect and radioed for extraction with a voice that had steadied into something like command. As they moved to leave, Adrian's phone vibrated in his pocket with a single new message. A still image of the warehouse they'd just left, time-stamped 3 minutes earlier. With a caption that read, "Wrong door night," he looked up. The corridor behind them was sealed. The shutters pounding in the distance were not the sound of backup, but of reinforcement. Through a doorway, lights snapped on in a room they had not seen before, and men in black stepped from shadows. Rifles raised. He felt the world tilt toward the inevitable bargain Luca had offered. Win one son and risk everything else. Adrenaline surged like chemical fire. His team formed a shield and turned toward the new threat. He had reclaimed a son, but he had not yet reclaimed a future. And the map of his life had narrowed into a single line that led toward an unavoidable choice. His earpiece chirped. A voice quick and controlled. "Boss, multiple units inbound, blocked exits." He looked at the boy in his arms, at the man who had betrayed him for sport, and then at the shadowed men at the door. Some bargains are made in blood. Some are enforced with clocks, he swallowed. And somewhere in the metallic hum of the warehouse, the sound of a countdown began to echo in his bones. The clock started ticking. The city never slept. But that night, even its shadows seemed to hold their breath. Adrian Knight stood in the center of his penthouse, the skyline stretching before him, black glass and lightning. Below him, his empire was dying piece by piece, just as Luca wanted. He had 6 hours to make the choice that would end everything he'd built, or everything he'd ever loved. The twins' faces haunted him. Elena's voice replayed in his head, weak, shaking, but still fierce. "Don't come for me." "They want the twins." He couldn't obey. He'd never obeyed anyone, not even love. Adrian's men moved like ghosts through the room, loyal, silent, armed to the teeth. But their eyes said what none of them dared speak. This war wasn't about business anymore. It was about blood. It was about redemption. Adrian loaded his gun, his hands steady despite the storm inside him. "We leave in 10, he said. No one argued. No one needed to. The name New York carried its own gravity. The final battlefield where kings were made or erased. Miles away, Elena sat inside a cold warehouse, wrists raw from the rope, eyes fixed on the single flickering bulb overhead. Every heartbeat reminded her she was still alive, and that her sons weren't beside her. The memory of their small hands, their laughter, burned through her chest. She hated Adrian for what he'd done, but somewhere deep down, she still believed he'd come. That belief scared her more than death itself. Love had always been her weakness, and her curse. Luca paced the upper catwalk of the warehouse, the metallic echo of his boots taunting her. "You think he won't trade everything for you?" he sneered. "Adrian's pride built an empire. His love for you will burn it to the ground." Elena met his eyes without fear. "You'll never understand him," she said quietly. Luca laughed, cruel and hollow. "I understand him better than anyone. I am him, just without the leash of your love." Outside, engines roared through the rain-soaked night. Black SUVs moved in formation, slicing through traffic like blades. Adrian sat in the front seat, eyes locked forward, his jaw set like iron. His phone buzzed again, another video file. He pressed play. The twins were crying. One of them whispered, "Mama," before a man's voice cut in. "Time's running out, Knight." Adrian's knuckles turned white. "Step on it," he growled. The driver didn't need telling twice. When they reached the dockyard, the air smelled of salt and gasoline. The same place where he had once saved Elena now waited as a graveyard of shipping containers and rusting steel. His men fanned out, scanning for movement. In his earpiece, static crackled. Then Luca's voice purred through, "Welcome to the end, boss. Did you bring my throne papers?" Adrian's reply was ice. "I brought your death." Then came the first explosion. A container erupted into flame, sending shards of metal across the yard. Gunfire split the night. Adrian ducked behind a truck, returning fire, his men falling one by one. It wasn't a rescue. It was an ambush. Luca had planned this like a chessboard, every move pulling Adrian deeper into checkmate. But Adrian wasn't a player anymore. He was the storm. He moved through smoke and bullets like a shadow, precision in motion, a predator reclaiming his kingdom. One by one, he took them down. The firelight flickered across his face. Not rage now, but purpose. He was fighting for something he'd never understood until it was gone. Love wasn't weakness, it was war. Up above, Luca watched from the catwalk, smirking. "Always predictable," he muttered, drawing his gun. Below, Adrian found the room where they'd hidden the twins. The door was locked from inside. He kicked it open. The boys huddled together in the corner, eyes wide. For a heartbeat, time stopped. He dropped his gun and knelt. "It's okay," he said softly. "Daddy's here." But before he could touch them, a gun clicked behind him. Luca stepped into the doorway, aiming straight for Adrian's head. "Touching," he said. "Now hand over your empire." Adrian slowly raised his hands, eyes on Luca. "You'll never have it." "I already do," Luca replied. "By sunrise your men will swear to me. And she—" He tilted his gun toward Elena, who had been dragged in by 2 guards, bleeding but unbroken. "She'll watch you die first." Elena met Adrian's gaze. For a moment the world shrank to that single look, all the words, pain, love, and betrayal between them. No promises, no forgiveness, just truth. She shifted her weight subtly, catching Adrian's eye again. A silent message. Now. The lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the warehouse. Screams followed. Gunfire flashed like lightning. Adrian lunged forward, slamming into Luca, the gun skidding across the floor. They fought brutally, raw and silent, every punch carrying 5 years of regret and fury. Luca's blade slashed across Adrian's side, but Adrian didn't slow. He grabbed the knife, turned it, and drove it into Luca's chest. Luca gasped, disbelief flooding his face. "You're no king," he choked. Adrian leaned close. "No," he whispered. "I'm a father." Luca's body hit the ground. The gunfire faded. Only the crackle of flames remained. Adrian turned, bleeding, searching for Elena. She was kneeling beside the twins, untying their hands. For the first time in years, she looked at him not with hate, but something quieter, sadder. "You're hurt," she said. "We have to go." He nodded, breathless. But before they could move, a voice echoed through the burning metal. "Step away from them, Mr. Knight." From the shadows emerged a figure in a long black coat, a pistol glinting under the emergency lights. Adrian froze. The voice was unmistakable, deep, calm, authoritative. His father. Elena's face went pale. "No," she whispered. The elder knight stepped closer, flanked by armed guards in the same crest-marked suits Adrian once wore. "You've made quite a mess," his father said coolly. "All for a woman I warned you to leave." Adrian's blood ran cold. "You sent that first letter," he said slowly. "You threatened her." His father smiled faintly. "I protected the family. You turned against it." The tension in the air turned razor sharp. Elena pulled the twins closer. "If you want him," she said, voice trembling but steady, "let the children go." The elder knight's eyes softened, almost. "They carry my blood," he said. "They are my legacy." Adrian stepped forward despite the guns aimed at him. "You'll never touch them." For the first time in his life, Adrian saw fear in his father's eyes, not of death, but of losing control. "You've already lost everything," the old man said. "Walk away." Adrian shook his head. "Not this time." And then he fired. The shot ripped through the silence. But it wasn't his gun that fired. Adrian's body jolted. He staggered back, the pain white-hot, blooming across his chest. Elena screamed his name, catching him as he fell. Smoke filled the air. His father's men surrounded them, guns raised, but the old man's expression cracked. Guilt, shock, pride twisted together. "You shouldn't have made me choose," he whispered. Elena pressed her hand against Adrian's wound, blood soaking her fingers. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "You can't leave again." Adrian's vision blurred, his hand finding hers. "Tell them," he murmured, voice fading. "Tell them I wasn't the monster they said I was." Sirens wailed in the distance. Police, fire, chaos closing in. His father disappeared into the shadows, leaving the warehouse to burn. Elena screamed for help, but the flames swallowed her voice. The twins clung to her, crying as Adrian's breathing slowed. Then a sound, a second heartbeat. Weak but steady. His hand twitched. His eyes opened just slightly. Blue, fierce, alive. Elena froze, disbelief flooding her face. "Adrian," she whispered. He looked at her, a faint, blood-stained smile curving his lips. "It's not over," he said softly, and before she could respond, another explosion ripped through the dockyard, tearing the scene apart in fire and smoke. When the flames cleared, he was gone. Only a single silver locket remained in the ashes, still warm, still engraved with his family crest, and inside a fresh drop of blood.